way. And I will let them do most of the rest of the introduction, but without further ado, would you help me in welcoming Roger and Betsy?
So I'm Betsy, not Bessie, just to make that clear. There's a T in there.
Thanks for having us. I slid my wholesale promotion flip chart around so you could see that, but
We thought we might need to do more math, so we brought the flip chart as well.
yeah, I think our presentation ties in really good with the previous presentation, and do you want to go ahead and read do our slide deal?
Oh, sure. Sure. I forget how, oh, here's the clicker. Sorry, we're not real polished at this. Just to give you a little bit about ourselves, we'll read our mission and vision for you. Our mission is to provide genetics and services that help cattle producers attain more freedom and profitability in their business and life. And by freedom, we mean cattle that you don't have to babysit and, hand feed and all that kind of thing. I'll let you do the mission, Raj.
Enderlin Ranch is holistically managed and operated to produce healthy nutrition and environment for people, livestock, and wildlife. This is accomplished by resilience to economic and environmental factors and provided opportunities and profits for all involved. It is managed and operated by a team of motivated, goal-oriented, and open-minded individuals who work together in a respectful manner. So, basically our mission and vision is kind of our guiding light. Any choices or decisions that we consider for our operation is all kind of bounced off of that. If it doesn't seem to align, or that's a strike against the idea. So it just gives us a way to focus on the long-term thing quite a bit, like Megan was talking about. Focusing on several years down the road is kind of how we try to strategically do our planning.
Can you hear me all right on that?
Yes.
And how we know Montana is through he's been an apprentice through the Career Coalition, and was with us for a year or two, and we seem to just keep crossing paths, so that's awesome. And we have a Monday morning meeting, a planning meeting, and we actually do read our mission and vision at the beginning of every meeting, so probably should have had you say it. Next slide. So why winter graze? Why would we want to do that versus feeding hay all winter?
Well, in our case, in our situation, we by no means are trying to say that this is any kind of a recipe. It's just what works for us. But by winter grazing, we can reduce our feed costs. I think there's some parameters that need to go around that. The cost of hay versus grazing, and there's lots of different mathematical equations you could go through one way or another. We normally have some combination of we're supplementing high protein feed, but there are some basic parameters. I mean, if you're calving in January, February, even early March, winter grazing could be a really, really hard choice to make unless you just have some outstanding native range. And we've certainly found that in our area we lease a lot of land. We have a lot of smooth brome and crested wheat. I mean, they're kind of they're just there, and they're really, really hard to get rid of. But or to change that mixture to a more palatable winter feed kind of thing. But it just does not maintain much forage value through the winter. But we're still able to utilize that as an energy component, and we're using the high protein hay to drive that. But so we just kind of put together some scenarios, basically, that things we would consider We would typically, this time of year, we'll do a forage inventory. And that forage inventory is volume and type and just a mixture of what it is. And I think everything it ends up tying back to what is your forage inventory. And then we look at that from a soil health perspective as well, and that very high consideration for the soil health perspective. So basically, we're really wanting to have that stockpile forage out there at this point, even if it's a really, really low quality forage, because we know we can supplement that with high protein hay, cake, or tubs, and we've just got a handful of numbers. Every operation is going to have its individual characteristics that lend it towards hay, cake, or tubs, or whatever you would choose. Lots of options for protein supplementation. But there is some generalized cost breakdowns in it. Like with cake, it makes a difference if you're... Okay.
It's coming.
Okay.
I guess just a little bit how we got to the point of winter grazing. I guess probably in the 90s, we were trying to keep up with the bigger, better, faster, more mentality, and trying to compete with in the Angus business, just trying to get the biggest calves, and we were calving in February, and as a lot of you know, that's not really the most pleasant time, and we were not making ends meet. I mean, the bankers were coming to look at our cattle to see if they should haul them to town, and that was not a fun time. And we went and just decided, we need to really look at cutting costs. How can we do something different? That's when we started thinking about calving later, grazing through the winter as much as possible, and reducing a lot of those costs. And we're still here, so we did okay. So.
Yeah, and the other really good comparison with Megan's slides was the cycle that you're at, that your cow is at during the year. Anytime you're going against you have a native forage or introduced grasses, but if you're doing a forage-based system, it's highest, you align the nutritional value of the plants with the nutritional requirements of the cow. And when you look at that, it doesn't make sense to calve, because anytime you're way out of balance there, it's costing you a lot of money somehow. For every ranch operation is different, but it is going to cost you money. If your highest demand on the cow side for nutrition is after calving, as that slide represents, say that's February, March, April, there's nothing growing here in Montana. So my question would be, why would you calve when you know you're going to cost a lot of money to make up that gap? So we calve starting in May. Then those cows will go to green growing grass by when they start calving, and they'll be lactating then through May, June, July. But we still have a good opportunity to capture the highest nutritional value of the forage.
Why winter grazing can work for us? Because we calve a little bit later than a lot of people. We live in an area where Chinooks come, so we typically don't get that crust on the snow. We'll get, we can get a couple feet of snow, but then it blows and it warms up, and typically it's gone. It didn't happen last winter, however, but typically it blows off and warms up, and the grass has been in a pretty short time. We do, in our grazing plans, we do plan to leave standing forage specifically for winter grazing. So that's part of our plan. And what we winter graze, we typically don't graze it for a whole growing season, right? We supplement with high protein hay as our winter forage is not high quality enough, like Roger said. We pretty much do that with just our 4 to 10 week cows, not the younger cattle. We do feed them. We intentionally put pressure on our cattle. As seed stock producers, we feel it's our job to put pressure on cattle so that when they go to someone else's place, they do a good job for you. And we will have a minimum of 30 days of full feed for that bunch that
one is substitute feeding. And substitute feeding is when they cannot get to forage. So that's when you're putting out hay. Supplemental feeding is when we're just making up the balance of the quality of whether it's poor quality hay or straw or whatever it is that you may be using as a substitute. The supplemental feeding then is making up that difference in protein component of that to make that balance.
So we just did some math. When you're looking at analyzing protein supplement, do the math. I guess I just pulled some costs off of some invoices we had and some research, but say 16% cake is $4.50 a ton, and I'm sure people can get it cheaper if you buy a lot of it. But if you figure out how much protein is in that 16% ton, or 16% protein, 320 pounds in that 1 ton of cake. 450 divided by 320 is $1.40 per pound of protein. With tubs, 30% tubs, 130 per 200-pound tub. That's actually $1,300 per ton. 600 pounds of protein in a ton of tubs. That's $2.17 per pound of protein. High protein hay, 20%, which we just spoke for, a bunch of it, so 175 per ton. And those are so I guess the next slide is fed prices for sure. Is that fed price? Okay, no, sorry. 400 pounds of protein in 1 ton of hay, and that math is 44 cents per pound of protein. So there is a big difference in the math of the pound of protein. Obviously, there's the mineral package and the cake, and then there's other reasons, convenience factors. So you just have to analyze what works in your scenario.
Yeah, and I think that that's kind of a per ton price. Semi-load lots, you're going to be able to buy cake for possibly half of that. But at least the overarching thought is just to do the math, so you know what it's actually costing. And the requirements, as Megan pointed out, are out there and they work. And so we've got all the information we need. We just need to dig a little and make sure that we've done some analysis ahead of time. We really like, the component of the resiliency as it connects to soil health as well. We really like the idea. I know Megan was talking about 2 or 3 years. We've had times when we had up to 2 years of standing forage in front of us. We've had times when we only had 6 months. But that gives you some drought resiliency. It also relates to some stored forage component. We like to have no less than 30 days of full substitute feeding available. Ideally, a couple months, 2 to 3 months is better, and 2 to 3 years would be great. But it does. If you combine the standing forage and the hay stockpile, I think you can approach that 1.5 to 2 years pretty easily.
Not to mention the ecological benefits to having that cover out there for the soil, as well as bird habitat and pollinators and all those good things too. So we did some math, and our math's a little bit different than Megan's, and maybe we need to go back to school. We just used a 1,200-pound cow. Our cows actually average 1,100 pounds because there was a question about cow size. That's pretty much what our cows average, mature cows. And we didn't really look at it per time of year, just in general, just thinking about winter, I guess.
It's also just a bigger picture planning tool. We use 3%, and then we round that up a little bit. So 3% of a 1,200-pound cow would be 36 miles of dry matter per day. And I round that up to 40 for the simplicity of math. But it's, I think having that buffer in there, it also comes into play in the 2 to 3 year plan.
So typically we try to supplement for protein like 25% of their protein needs and let them graze the other 75%. So what we'll do is typically feed protein like 2 to 3 times a week to the mature cows. We do it daily to the younger animals, but so we don't have to get equipment out and get it out there every day. So we just do the math, what it is per week, and then divide it by 2 to 3 times, and that way we get weekends from not doing it too. So, but they can utilize it just the same on that basis too. So.
The other thing along those lines is because of the different protein requirements of cattle at different stages of their life, if you have a really, really generalized rule of thumb, and I got this from Bert Teicher, but if you have over 15% protein supplement, basically 5% of that, or 5 pounds of that per day, comes pretty close to giving you a big picture budget for what you need per head. Because a calf is going to need, I think, is right close to that 15%. So you're going to almost have to feed that calf to 15% hay. A young cow, yearlings and young cows are going to be able to need that 12, 11, 14, 11, depending on their stage of life. But a weaned calf at 500 to 700 pounds is going to need closer to that 15%. And then a mature cow herd can probably get by with 9 to 11% protein. But for big picture math and planning how much you need to have on supply, 5 pounds per head per day, if you're needing to supplement, comes pretty close to giving you a rough idea of how many truckloads of whatever it is you need, or tons or whatever, which is kind of nice to have that kind of universal. That's not very scientific, but it does get you in the ballpark with estimating how much inventory you need to have on it.
So I just did some quick math and just what it takes per month per cow. For cake is like $46. Tubs would be about 72, and hay about 15 per month per cow. So there is a big difference, and when you multiply that by a few hundred head, it adds up. So how does grazing compare to feeding? And we figured $50 per ton to feed it, in addition to the hay, cost of the hay.
Yeah, so basically we just wanted to throw up some examples there. If you're feeding 40 pounds of head per day at 11% protein hay, that's probably all they need. They're going to get by just fine on it, but it's going to cost you $90 a month. If you're feeding $250 per ton hay, it's going to be $150. That's going to equate to $150 a month. And if you're going to feed straw, that's, who knows, but it's probably 3 to 8%, or if it's a grain hay, could be a 3 to 8% protein. And if you can get that purchased or put it up for $100 a ton, $50 a ton, and $50 to feed it, you're going to be down to $60 a month. So then if you would add in $15 approximately, you'd be at approximately $75 a month. And we have found that to be a big deal for 4 to 5 months out of the year. If winter pasture has real value, and that's how we think of it. We think of what's our yield per acre, because the comparison would be, if that's ground that you can hay, you're harvesting about 1,200 pounds per acre with grazing, and you probably could have harvested 2,400 pounds if you cut it for hay. And that would almost make that a wash, but the things that we've found that really, really make a difference is the fact that when we're talking about long-term resiliency and things, that cover on the ground, soil health and all those things, we've found that some of the most important things we have on our landscapes is some of the smallest things there are amongst us, and that starts with the mice and voles and all the biological activity that's propagated by leaving that cover, not to mention the amount of resiliency that can give you to wind erosion or moisture being taken out by wind because there's good cover on the ground. And we're not burying that soil off in the heat of the year. So we're also controlling soil temperature, which really minimizes the biological damage. And to back that up, you know, we've been at this for a fair amount of time, but in 2011, we averaged about 21 acres per animal unit. That was everything adjusted down to a 1,000-pound animal unit. In 2022, we were 14 acres per animal unit, and I would guess now we're closing in on 10. So we're making steady ecological improvement and biological improvement, which is basically, it's a soil health. We're retaining more moisture, I think. I think we have higher percent organic matter. I think we have more nutrients on the soil. And along those lines, either way you cut it, whether you feed hay, if you cut the hay and harvested that 2,400 pounds and carried it back out on the field, and you're feeding 40 pounds of hay and you add in a little bit of water that's converted to urine, and you're easily upcycling 50 pounds of bioavailable nutrient per day per cow. So, you know, you could possibly look at that, and we're doing the same thing with winter grazing. They're upcycling that nutrient, although there's a 50% factor, because you're only going to harvest 50%. It's going to desiccate and be less valuable in the winter time. So you can't say 1-to-1 with hay, but you're still upcycling all that nutrient, putting it back on the land, and letting that feed the biological things, and really making that cycle start to tick. And then if you combine that with leaving a cover on the soil so you let that biology thrive, we've found, and I think, those are the things that really contribute long-term towards increasing our average production. And we don't know really anything, but those are the trends that we're really seeing and that we're finding out are really inadvertent surprises that we didn't necessarily focus on at first.
So this is an interactive part, as Megan pointed out. What other benefits can you think of for winter grazing versus feeding in the winter time? Anybody have any thoughts?
I have a young man.
Montana's gotta know something.
Go ahead.
Wintertime feeding with equipment is pretty hard on it. Sub-zero, starting up tractors, vehicles, tough on them.
It is, and we haven't quantified that. You know, some of the reasons, but we put $50 a ton in as a factor. I don't know if that's very accurate or not. I've talked to people who claim it's higher. I've talked to people who claim it's lower. And it's, you know, people that can get around fine and feed with a bale bed, I think they can do pretty reasonable. But there certainly is a wear and tear, and the cost of repairs and things is hard on stuff. You know, I think the considerations before you would think about, you have to evaluate where you're at now. I mean, if this time of the year, if you've got a lot of extra hay, if you've got a plentiful supply of hay, and you feel you have a 25% buffer of standing forage that you don't think you're going to use or don't really have a need for, I would say you'd be a good candidate to start down that road and think about it and do the math and see if it's a consideration. But if you're marginal on the amount of hay you have on hand, and you're marginal on your forage is all used up, and you haven't had the fall rains, you don't have any growth, and you think you're probably a month away from feeding at this point, you know, I'd just go ahead and do what you do. Cattle prices are in your favor, and go with what works, and start planning the 2 or 3 years down the road as to how you would start to implement some of these things, because it is a one thing at a time. You can't just, I don't think you should just, never say can't do this, but I would not advise trying to switch gears completely. And if you're calving in February, you know, I'm not sure it's a good fit. You might think it getting your cavity a little more in balance with when the nutrient level in the grasses are up higher. You might think of doing that first. There's definitely costs to change. If you change a bunch of cows from January, February calving, even March, and take them all the way to May, you'll probably have 20–30% fallout, just like that. And we did it 2 weeks at a time per year. I would not advise that. It seemed like it just drug out the misery. The easier way to do that would be to pull the plug and do it in 1 year and be done.
Or maybe liquidate and buy back ones that are already.
And that, we didn't think that was an option because we're in seed stock business and we loved our cows, but that's not a very good excuse either. Really, we could have probably done something considerably different. Bought ourselves, moved a lot quicker.
But I think the biggest barrier to change is what the home masters with the Taylor soils calls the middle paddock, which is up here in our line. And sometimes I think we just think change is not possible because this is the way we've always done it. So I guess I challenge everybody to, think outside and, what would it look like if we could do something like that? At least partially, would that help our costs, help us be more profitable? So I guess.
Are we about out of time?
I guess it's probably time for questions.
One more quick thought would be, if it's not something you can even think of considering, that's fine. But if there is something that you're curious about, I don't think switching gears all at once is the answer. And if you don't have extra feed or extra forage inventory, I think the starting point for us was we started trying to get a little bit better utilization during our summer grazing time. And we started by doing that by dividing some pastures and getting a little bit more uniform consumption and utilization during the growing season. And at the end of that, you'll have a little buffer of land that you did not necessarily graze. And it is stockpile feed. And if that means that you can leave that through the winter and turn out cows 2 weeks earlier in the spring, that's quite a savings. So that you can attribute to that. So just thinking of ways to try to work or sample something, first of all, to see if you like it. Because if you don't like it, there's no sense doing it.
So any questions for any of us, I guess? So. We brought a flip chart in case we need to do math.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much.
Applause to our speakers. I think next on the agenda is lunch, so sit tight, socialize a little bit, and soon we'll be ready soon.